Hey, welcome back to the My Broadband Cloud Conference 2021, chatting to Datacentrix and HPE. And I'm looking forward to chatting to you about this one, Jaap, because your title of this presentation really intrigues me. Cloud, the anti-hero. Now, Jaap Scholten is the head of Group Hybrid IT Strategy at Datacentrix. He's going to go through this presentation called the Cloud, the Anti-Hero, which I'm really curious about the name in just a moment. So if you've just joined us, a warm welcome to you. Now, Datacentrix is a hybrid IT systems integrator and service provider that really drives innovation, digital transformation, and the right business outcomes for its clients. The company's core business practices are value-driven and service-led. Now, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, HPE, is one of Datacentrix's strategic partners and an important part of the company's hybrid IT strategy. Now, before we get started, we'd like to find out from the audience that's watching this right now, what is your single biggest barrier to cloud adoption? What is that biggest barrier that you have to cloud adoption? Is it cost? Is it security? Is it skills? Is it data sovereignty? Or is it the multi-cloud approach? And I guess all of those are valid, but what would you say is the biggest pain point, when it comes to maybe multi-cloud complexity? Now, we'd love you to submit your responses in the comments below, and you stand a chance to win one of 5 lucky draw vouchers that are worth 500 Rand. So please do participate and let us know. So, Jaap, it's a very interesting one. Out of those pay points, I guess that they're all very relevant, and I guess it depends as well on what your where you are on that journey to the cloud, right? Because every one of those has a validity, I guess, depending on the organization, what exactly you do. What's your take on those 5? What would you have voted for?
When I'm not going to answer you directly, but whenever I do a talk on this, it depends so much on the audience, and I put some of these questions out to do a live poll, and I'm always surprised that there's no consistent answer. So, new audience, let's see who the winner is, or the loser, whichever way you look at it. But in general, what seems to be a major issue is security, which is always interesting to me.
Yeah,
cost and all these things obviously play a role, but security pops up quite often as the biggest concern.
No, I think you're spot on there. And I would have said security as well, because it seems to be popping up over and over again. And I guess that this remote working environment has added so many different vulnerabilities. Now, we had a fascinating discussion earlier with Rachel, and I want to come back to that. And I know you've got some slides that you're going to be demonstrating Cloud the Anti-Hero, which is the title of your presentation. But why is Datacentrix pushing a data-first strategy harder than a cloud first, when everyone seems to be doing cloud first in their approach?
Yeah, thanks. I actually like this slide. Data is the new utility. And I'm going to take a step back maybe a little bit and just sketch around that. So business used to spend a lot of time on customer behavior research, and that research was not always based on specific businesses or a company, but rather kind of a market sector in some country somewhere, and then adapted to local conditions. Plus, of course, marketers use a healthy dose of gut feel, but the results they got was always reactive. And with data, with real-time access to your company's data, specifically the unstructured data that they collect from all their disparate systems, tools like machine learning can provide you with insights that are very, very specific to your business. And whether it's customer behavior or procurement trends, stock levels, even staff behavior, you can now have information at your fingertips that allows your business to adjust to those dynamics, and hopefully so in real time, of course. And where all this heavy lifting is done, it's in the cloud, of course, because that's where the tools live, and that's where they are powerfully be able to tap into all that data securely, I should add. And the cloud really has a massive role to play here. Having all that data come in from disparate systems and aggregate into one ecosystem, one cloud ecosystem, really, it gives you access to those business tools. So a data-first strategy provides us an end-to-end kind of journey or roadmap them to digitalization. And this includes those 3 pillars I mentioned during our earlier discussion that support our strategy, really being the data hosting, the data transport, and the data security. That roadmap touches on every single point of the cloud journey and incorporates a really in-depth consultative process. We match that with a very mature service catalog. We've got data management tools, and of course, cloud optimization solutions. Actually, so much more than we can cover here right now. I just wanted to say you have to also continuously manage that process, and we like to do regular gap analysis just to really ascertain where we are versus where we want to be and determine that gap and how we get there. And really, data for me is the golden thread that keeps it all together. I think if I were to write a book on this, it's probably called It's Not About the Cloud.
Yeah, it's very interesting. When you look at the speed of data, I mean, time is critical. You mentioned in real time, which is so important. You just cannot wait lengths of time to access the data and to find out what the outcomes of that are going to be. And especially when you look at things like customer experience, customer experience is, in business today is really critical, and it's the differentiator. And it's very interesting you say how you manage the data, because at the end of the day, managing the data correctly and fast and efficiently is really, really key. So interesting thoughts there about data. Now, when you look at the time frame, now what is that time frame that business can expect from implementing strategies such as the Datacentrix hybrid IT? I mean, timeframes are important.
Now, this is definitely not real time. I think there's some major misnomers around the time it takes to kind of go to the cloud. Yes, of course, projects such as moving your exchange to Office or M365 as it's called now, those processes are well known, and it's very much a scripted procedure. If you know the size, you can determine the time. But taking a business on a digitalization path is a multifaceted process, really. Obviously, also depending on the size, how many apps, how many users, how many servers, effectively all those nuts and bolts that make up the IT aspect of the business. That size has a great influence on the time it will take. But I think proper transformation via digitalization for an enterprise while you're sitting down is kind of a 5 to 7 year plan. It's not a switch on and let's go. And that places a lot more emphasis also on the journey than on that initial engagement. I think doing business with a customer with a long-term view is obviously good business, as it keeps everybody on their toes. But especially in IT industry, people come and go on both sides of the engagement. The staff changes, management changes, and therefore the vitality of such a strategy has to be of such a high nature that it will survive all the dynamics of people and business conditions, changes in direction, methods of work. You mentioned the whole working from home thing, and a lot more. But to come back to your question, I think a good strategy takes time. Even if you have a cloud-first business, I mean, take Uber as an example. It took them 1.5 years to offer their first ride in San Fran, and another year to activate New York, which was their second location. And I think that's actually quite fast. But yet it took them 4 years before arriving in South Africa, and a total of 10 years before listing. And that's a long ride. Sorry for the pun, but
yeah. And of course, there you go, because if you look at how exponentially they grew to get to that 10-year, I think they hit 1 billion rides it took them 10 years to get those 10 billion numbers. But as you said, it's a ride. There's no shortcut to getting there. But at the end of the day, when you start talking about digitalization, and your next slide is going to talk to this, and when you sit around the table and you talk to a CIO and a CTO and you start talking about the money that it's going to cost, it really makes CEOs start to perspire. Their blood pressure goes up. They start to get these cold sweats when you talk about digitalization, modernizing our systems. How expensive is this digitalization plan, or does it actually save you costs in the long term? I mean, this is what the end goal is about. And let's talk about the money.
Sure. I think before we get to the money part, ultimately we want to make your business more competitive, our client's business. And I think that almost goes without saying. Naturally, we don't know your business as well as you do. So we ask our customers to tell us and explain what will make them more competitive. And then we help them to get there in terms of a hybrid IT strategy. But you need to be able to learn from the data that you have about your customer behavior and vendor purchasing habits and more that we spoke about earlier. If your aim is simply to get rid of hardware and virtualize it in the cloud, then it's actually quite costly. Not that you can build your own data center to the same specs or your own cloud to the same specs, but it still ends up often costing more than what they had. And that's not really a bad thing, by the way. But it's also not a business strategy. It's an IT strategy. And that's not what we're talking about here. So if you've got clearly defined business end goals, to be more competitive, to drive down manufacturing costs or move towards an e-tailing kind of business, then there's a massive cost optimization that will take place. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if you have all those data and your data subsystems in the cloud, you've got a more integrated data set which you can apply those insights and the machine learning and the artificial intelligence that will give you those results that you're looking for. But I have to mention, we see a trend where the net IT costs increase, but then they should be offset against market research or even offset against the traditional desperation of discounting. And just to take a retailing example, marketing would tell you, the marketing department would tell you that 30% summer sale will increase turnover revenues in that 1 month with a few points based on last year's experience. And good real-time data, the insight into the data could possibly indicate that you only need to do a 10% sale, and that would be enough to have the same revenue for that month while maintaining better margins. But if you don't have that insight, you just simply don't know, and then you do monkey see, monkey do.
Yeah.
So IT costs and business costs are blending more and more, and that fixation on the IT component, viewing that in isolation, I think effectively misses the point. So what we're doing here is we're elevating that IT conversation to a business conversation, and to me, that's where the difference lies.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I mean, it's you got to take a different approach to looking at your journey to the cloud today. It's really about becoming more competitive, as you just said, and it's not just about lifting the stuff that you were doing before in your IT department. It's a lot more strategic, and that's the approach that companies sometimes miss. Look at the market share you're gaining and look at how differently you're doing things to your competitors, for example, and that competitive advantage. You cannot monetize that competitive advantage. Now, the one question, and I see this is up in your next slide, is a lot of organizations have legacy systems that are not cloud friendly. What do you say to those organizations?
Well, as the slide says, keep it simple and possibly even stupid. But there's a saying that says you should never fall in love with your investments. And at some point in time, cloud or no cloud, applications that are left alone will become legacy applications. I think that's an inevitability. And those applications are the result of really not investing in your business systems. We also often see that the lack of investment was due to that sentiment that I referred to relating to high IT costs. This server to replace it is going to cost so much, and then they just leave it alone. But where we are today, IT and business are really intertwined. And we see that everywhere. And by separating the cost of a server from the application that runs on the server, it just creates silos. And you don't want those things there. I think the first step is probably acknowledging that the legacy apps need to be sunset at some point in time, which also means the business functions that app served need to migrate elsewhere. And this is not an impediment to the adoption of the cloud, because those processes can obviously very comfortably run in parallel. Hybrid cloud falls squarely into that philosophy of hybrid IT. Some stuff still runs on your premises, some in a data center, and some in a hyperscaler or a cloud somewhere.
So Jaap, I'm still fascinated about your title. In conclusion, how did you come up with this title, Cloud the Anti-Hero?
Yeah, thanks, Aki. It's actually important to get back there. I think there are enough plays and movies that we've seen featuring an anti-hero. And traditionally, the anti-hero is that lead character who lacks all the qualities of a hero or heroine, yet it's the very essence of the story, and by being the essence, becomes the hero. And to me, cloud is exactly that. there's no IT conversation currently that doesn't at one point mention cloud. And there's almost that teenage angst about cloud. Some have done it and burnt their budgets. Others have come back. And then there are even those that point blank just refuse to go there. So cloud, the anti-hero, fulfills that central role in modern IT. No doubt about that. Yet without the connectivity, without the security, our Mr. Cloud is just simply Mr. Nobody. So yes, we have to talk about cloud, but all the supporting roles have to be scripted in that story for it to make any sense to me. So that's where the anti-hero comes from. It really is our hero, but it doesn't act like one.
Well, absolutely fascinating insights and great advice. I think, many people fall into that trap, after with this discussion that we've just had about investing in the cloud, and it's that long-term strategy. It's nothing that's going to be a quick fix. But look at the business case, and I'm sure that you see this every day, that people that have trusted you with the processes, businesses that have gone with the trust in you and looking at the business process and looking at the strategic side, are now reaping those benefits, even 18 months down the line, that the increase in turnovers and the increase in their agility is monetizing the investment that they've made, and perhaps even more. And looking at competitors who haven't gone that approach and have taken a different cloud approach are now sitting back wondering, what did we do wrong, right, Jaap?
Yep, very much.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Jaap Scholten, who is the head of group hybrid IT strategy at Datacentrix. Jaap, thank you so much for your insights at this year's My Broadband Cloud Conference 2021. Thank you for being part of it. We really appreciate your time. And if you want some more information on what Jaap was talking about, have a look at the QR code on your screen at the bottom. And this is the QR code that you can get a lot more information on the Datacentrix HPE Green Lake information we've been discussing. It will take you to a microsite, and there's a lot more information that will unpack exactly what Datacentrix and HPE are working on. So thank you very much for joining us this year at this conference. We wish you well, Jaap.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here with you.